really see a whole lot of numbers from this middle section right here. A lot of 1s and 3s and 5s. So we'll do those 3. Attempt this today and see if that works. Okay, for number 1, you were looking at transformations. We started with this original y1 equals x and went on to y2 equals 3x minus 2. 2 things happen, one thing to the slope, one thing to the y-intercept. For the slope, it got steeper by 3, or is 3 times as steep. For the y-intercept, it was at 0. It's now at -2, so that shifted down to. This was doing this yesterday too, the changing of colors, so I apologize if that throws you off. Trying to get it fixed. One thing gets fixed and then the next thing breaks, so we'll just work on that. Questions on that one? For number 3, Jerry signed up for a streaming music service where there's a fixed cost for a monthly membership and a cost per song downloaded. His total cost is given by the linear graph below. And it's asking, what does the y-intercept in the graph represent? So first, recognize where the y-intercept is at, when x is 0, 11.99. So that y-intercept is describing how much the monthly membership is before he downloads any songs. Or at 0 songs downloaded, that would be his monthly membership, however you wish to word that. If at any point you need a bigger box for any of the answers, feel free to switch those around. Just tell me which one you switch it to, label them, whatever. Questions on that one? And then number 5, you have to graph on the sticky note graph that I gave you. This. So that should have been a vertical line at x equals 3. So wherever x equals 3 on your graph, draw a vertical line through that. If you haven't already, take out your notes from last class. I'm going to come around and grab tests. Okay, so remember that we're looking for what happened. The first one is always your given, and then we're looking at what did they do to get to the next part. So from step 1 to step 2, what changed? What did they do there, Michelle? Okay, subtracted 10 from both sides. So that would be your subtraction property of equality. And then from step 2 to step 3, did they divide? They were already dividing, so they multiplied both sides by -3. So that would be your multiplication property of equality. Questions on those two? I want you to go ahead and try number 3. I'll give you a minute or two. Yes. As soon as I don't get that. So for number 3, you should have had these 3 things. Multiplication, property of equality, addition, property of equality, and then division, property of equality. Do you have any questions about those 3? Yeah. Yes. Alright, go on to the next page. So previously, the last time we talked about this, I asked you, what does it mean to solve, or what is the solution? Something like that at the beginning. Now, this same kind of question, but a little bit more, what does it mean to solve an equation? It's to find that solution, but also to use inverse operations to do so. So to find a solution by using inverse operations, and then just so we're all on the same page with these inverse operations, what is the opposite or inverse of addition? Subtraction. Good. What about division? Multiplication. What about squaring something? It is square root. So, in general, we won't do a lot of this, but we will need to do some of this. If you are squaring something, so like 2 squared is 4. If I were to take the square root of 4, it's 2. So they undo each other. And then cube root and cube would also be inverses. If I have like 2 cubed or 2 to the 3rd power, that's 8. And then the cube root of 8 is 2. So they undo each other. If you get stuck at any point, use these steps because they're great advice for if you get stuck at any point. Distribute if necessary, if you can. Combine like terms, we'll talk about that in a second. Move the constant, the number by itself by adding or subtracting. And then our main goal, get the variable by itself by multiplying or dividing. Yes?
My calculator only has 3 batteries.
It's missing 2 batteries?
Not this
One.
one.
Okay. Did you double check your pocket? The calculator pocket. If it's not in there, I do have another. Okay. Some of them don't have that, so the batteries fall out all the time. Alright, I want you guys to look at this page and find any of these questions that look challenging, that you wouldn't be sure how to start it, you want to go over together, anything like that. Come on.
Number 3.
Number 3. What other one? Yes. Yes. I heard another one, but I didn't actually hear what you said. So on. 6. Carly, you were also going to say 6. Which one? 10. Okay. What were you going to say? 2 is very similar to 10, so that should help you do that. Okay, so we'll start with 3 and move on. So with all of these, we're trying to get the variable by itself. That's our main goal. So we're trying to get p by itself in this one. We got to get rid of the 2/3 and the 25. We want to get rid of anything not directly connected to it first, the 25. How would we do that? Add 25. So you're using those inverse operations. And then I'm going to show you how we can do this next part in one step instead of two. So we could multiply both sides by 3 and then divide both sides by 2 in 2 steps. Or we can do this in one by taking this fraction and flipping it and multiplying it on both sides. Now, I'm going to show you how to put that in your calculator. Okay, so we're going to do 140 times, there we go. And then we're going to hit alpha, the green button, and then y equals at the top. You should get something that looks like this. You may not get the blue part, but you should get this menu. So alpha, y equals, you'll get this menu, and then you're going to hit 1 or hit enter. It doesn't matter which one. And you should get a fraction bar. And then you can put in your fraction, what was it? 3/2. So 3, go down, hit 2, and press enter, and it will give you that answer. Anyone need me to do that again, or could not find those buttons? I have to do it again. Okay. So I'm just going to do the fraction part. Alpha, green button, y equals at the top. Get this menu, press 1 or press enter. Type in your numerator, scroll down, and type in your denominator. If you just press put in random fractions here, it will simplify it for you. So we want to start doing this instead of just dividing. Anyone still need help with that on the calculator? The original or the one we looked at? Oh, I know. Okay. Yes. Okay, so when you do that, we got 210. And we talked about last class that you can put whatever your solution is back into this to see if the solution is right or not. Later, I'll also show you how you can double check yourself on Desmos and in the calculator. Questions on number 3 before we continue? So, with 6, there are 2 different ways you could go about solving this. I'm going to show you both ways. Whichever one you like, you do that if you see a problem like this in the future. One is to get rid of the fractions. We don't want to deal with them. Let's get rid of them. If we wanted to get rid of them, we would think of a number that both 3 and 2 go into by multiplying. 6. So I could multiply this entire side by 6. But properties of equality, what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. I'm going to multiply both sides by 6. And when I do that, I'm going to distribute the 6, multiply the 6 to everything that's in the numerator, because this is really some fraction over 1. The 1 is going to multiply to the denominators, the 6 is going to multiply to the numerators. So this would change to 12x over 3 plus 6x over 2 equals 42. Now, we still have fractions right now, but they're about to go away. Because we can simplify 12 over 3 to get 4, and then put the x. And then 6 over 2 would give us 3x Now we can combine like terms. So these both have an x, so we can add them together, but just add the numbers, then put x afterwards. This one? You just have to think of some number these both can go into. You could have chosen 12 or 18, 24, keep going. But 6 is the lowest. And then divide both sides by 7. Other questions on that one before I show you the other way to do this? So, yes. Yes. So this way was getting rid of the fraction. The next one we're going to deal with the fractions. So if we were doing that, let's see if I can actually color this. Maybe there. Okay. I'm going to actually rewrite this here. So just write this somewhere where you have space. So if we're dealing with the fractions, we again still need a number that these both will go into. We'll still use 6. So I need to think of how could I change this number to be 6? What would I multiply by 2, yes. Fractions are like equations. What I do to one piece of the fraction, I have to do to the other. So then on the other fraction, I would multiply this by 3, both the numerator and the denominator, so that we're going to get common denominators. Like denominators. So this would change to 4x over 6 plus 3x over 6 equals 7. And then I could combine those fractions into one big fraction. And then combine those like terms. And then we could use, I forgot to name this, when we flip this and multiply on both sides, it's called multiplying by the reciprocal, the flipped version of a fraction. So that way everything here will cancel. The 7s here will also cancel, just leaving that 6. You could have double checked that in the calculator as well. So it doesn't matter which method you choose, you should get the same answer regardless, as long as your math is correct. Yes. This one? Yeah. We have to think of, if I'm multiplying this to get 6, what number could I multiply to get 6? Other questions? We're going to go back. We did 6, 9, and 10. So using our steps from above, it said if we can distribute, do that. We have something that's outside parentheses, so we're going to distribute that 5 to everything inside by multiplying. So we have 4m minus 15m minus 50 equals 126. And then we have like terms, so we can combine them, do exactly what it says. 4 minus 15 to get what? Negative 11m. Don't forget your variables. What would be the next step? Add 50. Negative 11m equals 176. Divide both sides by negative 11. Tell me what you get. Negative 16. Correct. Questions on that? So then for number 10, we're trying to get k by itself, but we got to get rid of that 12 and the 9. How could we do that? Multiply by 9. We can get rid of that 9 by multiplying on both sides. Because that way those 9's cancel. I don't have a fraction anymore. And then our last step. Please, a question. Because these are next to each other, so they're multiplying. So you would do that. What is K? -6. Now, we haven't been putting these back into it to double check, but really quickly we can do that for this one. If I put -6 back in here, -6 minus 12 is -18. -18 over 9 is -2, so that works. For anything that has multiple variables, you would put that number in every time you see a variable. Do we have any other questions on this page? Really quickly, I'm going to show you how to check yourself, like when you're at home practicing this on Delta Math, how you could check yourself on Desmos, or if you have your own graphing calculator at home, how you would do that. Okay, so let's do Desmos first. I'm going to put in just number 10. So one, Desmos doesn't like other variables other than x when you're doing things like this, so change your variable to x. Later, when you're practicing, you can try this. When you do a fraction, make it a fraction first. So when I put in that entire equation, it's going to give me some line that tells me what x equals, and that would be our answer, -6, which is what we got. So that's a quick way to double check yourself to see did you get the right answer, and go back and fix it if not. Now I'm going to show you how to do that in the calculator. So it's kind of the same thing, but there's a little bit more steps in the calculator. Go ahead and type in -6. Make sure you're using the bottom button for negative, not the minus. And you want to use this STO button right above on. You'll get a little arrow. And then you can use whatever variable you want. Here, I'm just going to use x by just hitting the button right next to alpha. And then hitting enter. And it'll look like nothing really happened. But what it did was took that -6 and put it in place of x. So every time I hit x now, it will say it's -6. And then I'm going to put in that equation. So I'm going to put it as a fraction first. Alpha y equals x minus 12 over 9. To get the equals, I need to go into test, which is right above math in blue. So anything in blue, you'll use second. So second math. And then number 1, the equal sign. And then -2. And then it's going to talk to you in calculator. So it's going to give you a 1 if it's right. You did that right. Or let's say I went back and did this, but I put in just regular 6 instead of -6. You don't have to do this part, you can if you want. Or it'll give you a 0 to say something is wrong, but it can't tell you what exactly. Yes. Yes. So that is a great way to use if you have a graphing calculator at home, a great way to double check yourself and see if you get a 1 or a 0. We want 1s, we don't want 0s. The STO button. Oh, the equal sign is in math, second math. Okay. Other questions on that or doesn't? So we're going to move on. Now, the next page is not something we're really going to talk about. I'm just going to kind of walk through this first step, and then if you see... And then if you see two-step equations, you could use this process if it helps you to kind of talk out what's happening. So if you get a two-step equation, you have some equation. That's the example equation. Then the steps part of this is explaining the equation. So the pick a number is some variable. It's being multiplied by 7. It's adding 5. The result is 26. So this is just explaining the equation. Then in the answer part, it's solving it, but in words. So it's starting with 26. It's saying subtract 5 from both sides. Divide 7 from both sides. The what is the number is looking for the solution. And then the check part is actually taking these and doing it. Taking 26, subtracting 5, getting that number, dividing that number by 7, and then that number is the answer, the solution. Then the last part is just checking it like we did previously, putting that number back into the original to see does that work. If I put 3 in here, I get 21. If I add 5, I get 26, which was that result. So that works. So this is a different type of way of checking yourself by talking it out. So if that helps you or you like that, use that. We won't do much with that, but we are going to go on to the next page. So notice that our learning targets have changed. Some of them are similar or the same ones, and some of them are slightly different. So with all word problems, I give this advice. Read through it. Find what's important. That's usually numbers, letters, or variables if it's given. Whatever it's asking you to find. Highlight, circle, underline, any of those things first, because that will make your life a little bit easier. Because now you know what you're looking for and you have that information. So we're going to skip number 1 and come back to it, just because that's a little bit more complex. Alright, so let's read this together. To mail a first-class letter, the U.S. Postal Service charges a flat rate of 53 cents and 18 cents for each ounce. It costs $2.69 to mail your letter. How many ounces does your letter weigh? What do you feel is important here? Okay, so the numbers are definitely important, but also what's describing those numbers is important. So the for each ounce, the flat rate of 53 cents, and then what are we looking for? What is it asking us to find? Say that again. Yes, how much it weighs, but also how many ounces it is. So, more specifically, how much does your letter weigh in ounces? If you're going to say it like that. So, a lot of your problems are going to be set up like this. Oh, I wanted to say this. Because last unit we were talking about in context problems where we were given something, but we really just had to find the x-intercept, the y-intercept, the slope, domain, and range from that. But now we're given some word problem where we have to find the important information and set up an equation and solve it and get the answer and all of those things. So it's different than what we were doing before. So in most of our problems, they're going to look like this, where if you see something that says for each or the word per, P-E-R, that's going to be your slope. So that point 18 is going to tell us that's our slope. If we see something that represents a total, so like 269 would be our total cost, that's going to be our y. If we see something that is a flat rate or a one-time fee, or you only do this once or pay for this once, that's some b, y-intercept. And then usually these are set up in a y equals mx plus b format. So the x would be whatever's next to slope. So if you're thinking slope is y over x, some dollar amount over ounce amount, the number of ounces would be your x. So then, once we figure out that information, we have to see which variable we don't have. And in this case, it's x. That's the only one we don't have a number for. We're going to define it by saying x represents whatever the question is asking, which would be number of ounces. When you define your variables, you could make x whatever you want. I would stay away from O, so it doesn't get confused for 0. T might get confused for a plus. Sometimes S because 5. So once we have that, then we can set up our equation. It's going to be in the format y equals mx plus b. So our y is 269. Our m is 0.18. We don't know what x is, but it goes right next to the slope. And then our b, we are adding all of this to get a total cost, would be plus 0.53. And then once we have that equation, then we can solve it. How would we start solving this? Go on.
Adding 0.53.
Close, not adding. Yes, there we go. Subtracting 0.53 from the total. And then divide. Go ahead and do that and tell me what you get for x. 2.16 divided by 0.18 was 12. But because these are word problems, we need labels. So 12 ounces. Correct. What questions do we have on that process? We're going to do a more challenging one. Go back to number 1. So in number 1, let's read that. The length of a rectangle is 3 inches more than the width. The perimeter is 30 inches. Find the dimensions. What do you feel is important there? 3 inches more than the width. What else? Okay. The perimeter is 30 inches. And then what are we looking for? The dimensions, which means both the length and the width. We're going to end up finding those two things. So because we're finding 2 variables, not just one, this one's going to be set up a little bit differently. Okay. So that first sentence talks about the length. It says the length of a rectangle is. So that means my length is representing this. I'm going to do this cursive L for L so we don't confuse it for a 1. Now, we know it's something about the width, 3 inches more than. What operation could I put in there to say it's more than? Not multiplication. Addition. So if it said 3 times more than, then yes, multiplication. But because it just says more than, we're just going to add. So that's one of our equations. But we also were given something about the perimeter. So in general, how do we find the perimeter of a rectangle? Yes. So if I had some rectangle and I added up all the sides, I would get the perimeter. I could also say that's the same thing, instead of saying length plus width plus length plus width, I could say that's the same thing as P equals 2L plus 2 width. Because there's 2 lengths and there's 2 widths, and if I added them all up, that would be the same thing as that. Now, we're going to take this and we're going to replace some of it because we know the perimeter is 30. And we know that length has this equation. So we're going to take this and put it in place of L in parentheses. and then put the 2w at the end. And now we have our equation that we're going to solve. So we're going to solve that. How would we do that?
Distribute.
Distribute the 2. Oh, and then combine like terms, add those two W's to get 4W, and then subtract 6 on both sides. We have 24 equals 4W, and divide, what is W?
6.
6 what? 6 pieces. Okay, so that's one piece. We found one of the dimensions. We still got to find our length. If we know that 6 inches is our width, and we know this equation for L, how could we find our length? Say again. By adding 3, yes. So if I take this 6 and I put it in for W, and I say 3 plus 6, that will tell me what my length is, which is 9 what? Yes. Say that one more time. So for this one, I need you to be setting it up like this. So all of these word problems, you probably could find a different way, but the goal of this is to be able to set up some equation to solve for it. Questions on this one? I'm going to let you try one by doing number 3. So you guys can work together, move around, and then we'll come back and talk about this. Before you move, I just want to explain that the first 2 parts are just writing some equation based on what's given. And it's talking about 2 different things, the blue car rental agency and the red car rental agency. So make sure you're not mixing those numbers. If you need my help, raise your hand, and I'll be around. I will start a timer for 10 minutes, and you guys can... Okay, the first 2, these should have been your equations. Y equals, if you change the variables to something else, you just need to tell me what they mean. You should have defined them. X should be number of miles, Y should be total cost, unless you use different variables. If you switch these 2 and put 26.27.60 plus 0.18x, that is fine, as long as you have both. And you didn't put the x in the wrong place. You didn't put the x with the 27.60. Questions on those 2 before we continue? Okay. Part C, yeah, Elizabeth, go ahead. Okay. Part C is where you actually start to put in numbers to solve for something. So in this case, we're going to be finding y, in my case, the variables I use, by putting 280 miles in for x for each one. calculate the total cost, we would have put 280 in for both X's and found what those totals were. What was the total for the blue car rental agency? It should not be that high. Those are high. So make sure you multiply by 2018, not the only net payment once. And then what is the total for the red rental agency?
79.
Okay, so we should have gotten 78 and then 79.60. Part D is asking which company is the better by finding which company is better by finding the savings. So which company would be better? Blue, because it's cheaper by $1.60. Questions so far before we get into E, F, and then problem G? For part E, we're doing the same thing but just changing the miles. So then when we change the number of miles, what is the cost of the red? And if you didn't get that far, go ahead and calculate that now. Multiply 0.14 and 400 and then add 40.
96.4.
Say one more time.
96.4.
96.4. And then the blue rental?
99.
So at some point, the blue was cheaper, but the more miles you have, the red would be cheaper. So if you, in the future, think about that if you're comparing car rentals. Okay, and then for problem F and problem G, now it's asking you to find the number of miles because we have the total cost and we have to find the number of miles. So now this would go in for Y, and we would keep the rest the same except change our variable of X back to X and solve. So subtract 27.60. What was that as the final answer? What was this one? Say that number one more time. 43.6. Yeah, I just can't hear it. Okay, and then when we divided Jackson, what was that number one more time? For X? For F. 242 exactly. Okay, and then this would be in miles. Now, the other ones we labeled with dollars, so that was our label. This one we actually have to label with words, miles. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing for G. Subtract 40. And then divide both sides by 0.14. What was that number of miles? 307.14. Now, when you get comes and you get decimals, be thinking, could this be a decimal? Miles can be a decimal, so that's fine. But if it were talking about something else, just think about that. Could that be a decimal or not? Did we have any questions on any of these? Okay. I want to give you a chance to start Delta Math that's due on Friday. For these, I misspoke on one of them. The multi-step equations that is due on Friday, not the multi-step equations with variables on both sides. So the one with the shorter title is informative. The word problems is still formative, so I just switched those two in my mind. It says it correctly on Delta Math. So you guys can grab an iPad or your computer and work on either of those Delta Maths or either of those discussions that are due today. If you need to finish a test, not retake a test, but if you want to finish a test, you can do that in the last 15 minutes. Do you want to do that? Yes.